Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. We have a break in the winter siege before the weekend, so hopefully we can get a few more leaves raked, etc. Just to remind everyone where the emergency exits are, and also to remind everyone that public notification for proceedings are being videotaped at this time and will be broadcast on YouTube. And to remind members of council that disclosure of pecuniary interest can be made now or at any time throughout the meeting. We will break as required. So at this time, I want to ask for members of council to move that council approves the agenda of session 23-2019. And I'd like to request that we remove the first item of under section 6, the zoning bylaw, building permit and fill bylaw issue, up to just after public question period. So with that amendment, if we can get moved by Martin and seconded by Nix. All in favor? Carries. And now looking for approval for the previous minutes, that the minutes of session 21-2019 as circulated. Moved by Nix and seconded by Martin. Is there any discussion on the item? Seeing none, all in favor? That carries. Okay, so now we're at public question period, and if I can request that any members of the gallery that want to ask a question of council or staff, that you come forward and use the mic and state your name and address. We would like at this time only to have questions on anything else but the item that we are moving forward regarding the Huron-Ontario and County Road 8 construction. So if anyone has any questions, wants to pose them now.
Budget, what a magnificent job we've done.
Our draft budget's on the agenda, so you're welcome to stay. Okay, so if there's nothing further, then we will carry on. So the first item that we will be looking at is the zoning bylaw, building permit and fill bylaw issues. And there is a memo that has been provided by Mr. Dunmore regarding the update on the approvals that were required and a recap on where the project is today. So Mr. Dunmore?
So as council's aware, at last session you requested that I put together sort of an overview of where this project stands today with respect to the items. In summary, in the summary section, I had noted that there has been a municipal approval that has been released. It's satisfied the accessory building coverage, building setbacks, and proposed use as per our current zoning bylaw and official plan. I further noted that the County of Dufferin has released a building permit for the personal storage building and septic system. The MVCA, Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority, has also released a permit with conditions. These conditions speak to fill areas, regulated areas, setbacks from regulated areas, siltation controls, planting and disturbed areas, driveways and site alterations, etc. With respect to the entrance work that was done on Huron-Ontario, the Public Works Department released a permit. This is aside from any municipal approval works that would be done, and this is a permit that's available to any resident for upgrades and or widenings and so forth. The County of Dufferin has issued a temporary construction permit for the easterly driveway along the County Road 8. And this is for a period of 1 year or occupancy, whichever comes first. And this entrance also would have had to meet the same sightline and guidelines that the town of, very similar guidelines to the town of Mono's conditions. Further in that county permit that I just spoke of, the most westerly driveway, and this is also mentioned in the NVCA permit as well, the most westerly driveway will be stopped up and closed, and the gate removed and plantings and so forth will be put in, and the ditch will be reinstated. That would be the same with the most easterly entrance once construction is completed. There was some concerns with respect to the fill that's being utilized. The applicant is currently building their base material for their driveway, which extends from the residential unit to the new build site for the personal storage building, and also works on the attachment to the temporary driveway on the county road has commenced, of which will be removed as part of the MVCA permit and the county permit. With respect to, so that's a general synopsis of the permits that have been released to date. The town has reviewed this file in accordance with and similarities with previous files that the town releases municipal approval, and this would all have occurred after the May 14th rescinding of where we had originally rescinded the municipal approval due to some issues with the site plan, and these are issues that have all been commenced since the May 14th. Sorry, I have the deputy and Mr. Manktel will contact you. So unless council has any further questions with respect to that, I would be happy to answer any questions from the public and or from council with respect to items moving forward.
Okay. Were you able to get a legal opinion regarding the fill bylaw and the works being proceeded with? So
the current works, and I'll speak to the MVCA and actually the fill in a bit too. The current works, the town did not determine that there was a requirement for a fill bylaw. This is associated in a sense incidental works with respect to the building permit that was released, and the works that have been done to date have been building of the base for the driveway connecting the buildings.
Is there any questions, Councillor Martin? Okay. Councillor Nix?
Well, I just was going to say, because we have a person sitting here in the audience who's asked the question, that I still am confused about our fill bylaw. You think notwithstanding the above, all the following applies, and I've read it. It's over my head, but we have got a legal opinion that this activity was exempt.
So the bylaw points in section 3.2 that save and accept the fact that there may be may not be a requirement for a fill permit. The bylaw points to the section that all the other provisions of the bylaw should be enacted. This would point us to conditions 4, which speaks directly to orders, and 5 through 10 inclusive. I think it was section 6.7 in the fill bylaw, which says that the minimum general terms and conditions of a variance or exception are set out in Schedule B. Now, Schedule B goes on to list 1, 2, and various letters of the alphabet, quite a few conditions that would be required. However, those conditions are for variances and exemptions that have been granted by council, so it's not subject to a permit, so these conditions don't apply. Now, speaking to concerns with respect to the movement times, the type of fill, and placement of fill, the applicant has provided the MVCA as a requirement of their permit with soils report. The existing soil that's being imported now and the soil that came in earlier this summer has been deemed to be clean by a soils consultant, and the future importing of fill has also been deemed to clean. The town, the MVCA, are in possession of these records as per the MVCA permit.
So at this time, I'd like to ask anybody that had any questions or concerns regarding what has transpired to date. This is not what I would call a formal public meeting where we're going to have delegations that are going to be 10 to 20 minutes basically to respond to the information that Mr. Dunmore has provided us in terms of what's happened to date and the approval process and the ongoing monitoring of the construction. So if anyone wants to come forward and ask any questions.
My name is Vicki Rowden. I live, is this on?
Is this on?
It is on, but you might have to get a little bit closer.
Maybe turn it down a bit. There,
There we go.
yeah.
Good. Yeah, is that better? My name is Vicki Rowden, and I live on County Road 8. On May 14th of this year, a large delegation of citizens presented to Council concerns about the development at Smokey's Garage on the corner of Huron, Ontario and County Road 8. A number of citizens came forward, myself included, to express concerns regarding the plans to construct a large commercial-size workshop with the intent to build customized vehicles in a zoned agricultural and residential area. Our mayor addressed the attendees several times during the meeting to say this was not a meeting to discuss the matter, and citizens would have the opportunity to do so once an application came to town for permit approval. I understand now that the permit has been issued for the property landowner to proceed with his hobby development. Contrary to the promise made on the May 14th meeting, it is apparent that the citizens have not been notified or will have the opportunity promised to express their concerns regarding this industrial-sized development in our neighborhood. This is a perfect example of citizen engagement. It begins with a culture whose principal foundation is citizen input should always be valued. It is fundamental to the ongoing success of community governance and should be welcomed at every opportunity. Now, our community is at risk, simply because we were not given the opportunity to address our concerns. Can council tell me why?
And so I realize at the time when I spoke about this, it was under the understanding that this would be a permit, a request for zoning change. And so it became apparent later on in the meeting that our planner did explain that no, that was not the case. This was not something that would require a zoning change. So I spoke in error, and I do apologize for that. But the way the application is in terms of that particular request, it has been submitted and request for personal use.
Even though citizen involvement and concerns, you didn't think that was an issue to address some of our concerns or before the permit was even issued? I mean, this is a commercial-sized building. I know the intent is for a personal workshop, but the landowner did say publicly and in print that he wanted to use it for customized vehicles. Is that private use? Is that, I mean, that says industrial use to me, industrial size building, industrial everything in a zoned residential agricultural area.
Right. And so the size of the accessory building is similar to a riding arena or another form of accessory building. And quite frankly, if an applicant puts down on their application and signs it saying that it is for personal use, I'm not sure what else that I, as a member of council, can do unless it is proven wrong in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bob Mitchell, 5 Side Road. I just wonder, council and maybe staff,
is there a good hard definition of what personal use is and commercial use is in the various bylaws that we're looking at? Because it's easy to say it's personal use or commercial, but how well defined are those two terms? Because I think a lot could ride on that.
And I agree with you, especially now that we've got this situation in front of us. So to review the bylaws and exactly what it is that is stated, it needs more clarity. I don't know if there's any comments that either Mr. Trotman or Mr. Dunmore want to make.
The term or the prefix personal, no. There are definitions that relate to the classifications of commercial zones in the bylaw. And again, as I've stated before, this is and has been for a while in the process of being updated. So there are a number of issues we're going to be looking at as part of the zoning bylaw update.
And is this particular definition, is it being looked at specifically?
Well, we're going to have to look at other zoning bylaws to see how those particular prefix or use or terms per se have been alluded to or defined elsewhere. So we do look at other bylaws to see what generally has been included in the body of definitions. And if there is a definition that's sound and it has integrity and can be clear, then we'll certainly look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Louis Baker, Model Center Road. Your comment, Madam Mayor, that from the recent information, things have changed. Nothing has changed from the day of May 15th, when the delegation came and complained about the potential problems here. Everything is exactly the same, except you've had, as council and as members of the senior staff, 4 and 5 months to investigate the allegations made here on the 15th of May. None of this is a surprise to you today. It was all told to you on the 15th of May. You made the promise to have a meeting. That promise wasn't kept. Circumstances have not changed at all. This is not a hobby. I sent you an email, all of you, back about 10 days ago, enclosing an article in reference to the event held by Smokies at the fairgrounds. In that, the author of the article, who I spoke to today, said it was very clear, by admission from Mr. Clark, that he does business in the States. He does bicycles, cars, and trucks, and motorcycles. Where do you think he does this? He has 2 18-wheeler trailers sitting in downtown Orangeville. What do you think he does with those? The man I spoke to today said he asked Mr. Clark where you operate from now. He evaded the question, didn't answer it. I called his office. I said, I have somebody who wants a bike. He said, well, we don't talk to you over the phone. We'll call him. He can't call us. This is a complete charade that you should have known about on May the 15th. And members of your senior staff, it's their job to have done that. The planner and the clerk. It was their job to make sure that these citizens were properly represented on the basis of what they presented that day. You didn't do any part of your job. In fact, you went opposite. You went back to your old habits of lack of engagement and no transparency. As far as Mr. Dunsmore's report, I'm told in 2 years ago, in 2017, the Municipal Act was changed, and the authorities, the conservation authorities, no longer have any jurisdiction over fill. Are you aware of that?
They do within a regulated area.
Pardon?
Within a regulated area, they do.
No, not according to what we have today. They have no authority whatsoever over it, not in the fill itself.
According to Bill 68, the received the bill was sent on May 30th, 2017.
Sorry, Mrs. Kehoe, we will not be able to hear you on the video if you don't approach the microphone.
Bill 68 received royal assent on May 30th of 2017, Section 142, Bracket 8, which turned over to the municipalities the right to deal with dumping of fill, removal of topsoil, and grading of sites, which were under the Conservation Authority regulations. It is my understanding that since the Cox issue, we have still not dealt with the fill issue, and had the fill issue been dealt with, we would not have this problem today. I think what we are doing is handing over our problems to other people to solve so that you cannot be blamed for being incompetent. Well, I'm sorry. The subject property is 80% of the property of Smokey's Garage is covered by CA, which should have been our right to rule whether or not he could bring in the fill. We have no idea. Nobody's told us whether those trucks had contaminated soil or didn't. Nobody's telling us whether the source where the fill has come from, where it is, whether the source was clean, and who certified it. No one's telling us that each of the trucks were tested. I was there from 11:41 a.m. on Saturday morning till 12:09. 17 trucks came in during that time, 7 of which had no markings whatsoever on the trucks. I also have the names of the trucking companies that did have markings. What my concern is, and my concern during the Cox issue and during any issue in Mono, we have an environment here that needs to be protected. We tell people how beautiful this community is, how wonderful it is to move here and live here, and we do nothing to protect it. We do nothing to stop it. A commercial entity in a residential farming area is not acceptable. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jeanette and I live on First Line. So most of this property is under environmental protection, and there is a stream that runs through the property. The stream connects with other waterways and flows all the way down through Canyon Falls and further even beyond. If an industrial-sized workshop, automotive workshop, is permitted to be built on this site, so close to the stream, there is the risk of fuel spills and chemicals running into the stream. This could have a harmful effect to an area extending much further beyond this property. In particular, it'll have an adverse effect on our wildlife species that depend on these rivers and streams. Therefore, this affects everything downstream from the property, with our most fragile species getting impacted the hardest. So has all of this been considered in giving the permit? And then furthermore, were the conservation authorities consulted with, and were there sufficient studies performed to ensure that there would be no adverse effects on our water and environment if such a facility is permitted?
Okay, so the application was sent to the NVCA for their review, and they did approve the application with the site plan attached and the structure being proposed. Mr. Dunmore, did you have anything else?
Fred, do you mind bringing up the site plan? So the building has been sited outside of the regulated areas as per the requirements of the MVCA. As I noted earlier, the soil samples and the soils consultants have provided records of analysis and clean fill items as you're requesting. The amount of trucks are being logged by the applicant and being submitted back to the town, and the my report was dated yesterday, I believe, but the actual 30 to 40 loads was referenced to last weekend. So whatever occurred this week is not contained in that report. So yes, the applicant has cited the building appropriately as per outside of the regulated areas, which would be the requirement of any resident of Mono that lives next to and close to the vicinity of a Street. There's no expectation that there will be any cleanup after the fact. Those are assumptive allegations. The applicant has done the proper tests and studies on the soil, the location of where it's coming from, and this is the soil that's entering the property.
Hello, it's April Addison. I live on here, Ontario. I think that, I mean, obviously you've already given us the facts of what's already happened and already been done. The question's been asked, why haven't we had input? And I heard somewhat of an answer to that. Getting back to the building itself and its sheer size, I think the sheer size of the building should raise some flags. So I know we all have a whole lot of questions, and I haven't heard a whole lot from the council, with all due respect, as to what are your thoughts regarding what has been happening? Have flags been raised for you? I think that it's obviously an industrial-sized building. It's an industrial-sized activity that are planned there. I don't know about the approval process or what was put on his application in order to be approved. Obviously, he's met all the bylaws, all the policies, everything's been met. I's have been dotted, T's have been crossed. Awesome. But working in appeals and dispute resolution, I know that especially when you're serving the community, there should be somewhat a test of reasonableness, a kind of a sit back and say, does this make sense? And is this what we want for our future? Is this what we want for the town of Mono? Town of Mono has an industrial park out on Highway 9, and why should one person be allowed to bypass what the town has obviously put in place with their planning and future expectations for the town of Mono? So maybe you can help us understand the approval process and what you considered and what you went through and what research you did, because back in May you did promise to look into this further. What did you find, and what thoughts brought you to the conclusions that you've come to?
I think you raised some very good points, and if you want to know what one councillor thinks, I'm very frustrated. First of all, other than an entrance permit on here, Ontario, which, you know, isn't subject to a public hearing, it's just whether the sight lines are okay, that's the only permit we've issued. Okay? We haven't approved anything. The only thing we signed off with when he applied to the county was that the application met our zoning bylaws. Now, and our deputy mayor certainly has raised some questions, and we're going to be reviewing that zoning bylaw, but right now, he's complying with it. But to some of your points and some of the issues you raise, I, as a councillor, am damn suspicious as to what this person intends to do with that building. And I suspect he is trying to get around us and open up a commercial operation. But until he does that, I have no power to do anything. But I can assure you, in terms of worrying about whether there's going to be spills or something there, I mean, we're going to watch this operation like a hawk. I sat on the board of the NBCA for 28 years. The first time we see any evidence that there's been some contamination or some possible contamination of those springs, we'll have the NBCA down here, okay? When and if we do detect that he's running a commercial operation, well, I'm not exactly sure what we do at that point, but we have sought legal advice on it, and we have some avenues to pursue when that occurs. So I totally agree with your being concerned about this application, and if I had some power to do something about it as a councillor, I'd do it, but I don't have any power to do anything. We haven't given him a permit, other than the entrance permit.
So the permits are being issued by the town of Orangeville?
No.
By the
The county, he's
DEFERRED?
got an NBCA permit, and that's the site plan. He's got an entrance permit from the county off County Road 8. He's got an entrance permit from us, the town of here, Ontario, which was already an entrance. It's just he modified it. I think there was a culvert. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Other than that, all the town's done is, when he applied for the building permit, it said, yes, it meets our zoning bylaw, which it does, whether we like it or not. That's all we've done.
So I think that what we don't hear is some of your frustration, and thank you very much for being honest about that, at least knowing that you have raised some flags and that you have some suspicions. But it's still frustrating because I'm back to the same point that I stood up here in May and said, that we're stuck being reactive rather than proactive. And what can we do about it, and what is the town council considering attempting to do about it? Because to wait till something happens and then maybe call a bylaw officer who doesn't get back to you till 3 days later, we feel defeated already and we haven't even started.
I think just to go back to the May meeting, because at that time he had on his Facebook page, he was going to have an event at the thing. He was advertising it, right?
He was advertising open to the public.
Yes.
Yes.
And I was under the impression, okay, he is opening something that's going to be commercial. He's going to have to come in and apply for a zoning change. And that would have entailed a public meeting with all the residents being able to speak. But he never did. He moved the event to the Ag Center and then complied with all the bylaws and permit conditions of the NBCA, the town in terms of building. And he's following all the laws that are out there right now. I'm still suspicious.
My apologies for being detained. It's hard to find a parking spot.
Microphone?
I was clearly unhappy back in May and expressed my view that we had a serious problem with our zoning bylaw, with our official plan. If an application of this nature could be granted as a right, as opposed to something that would come to council or go to a committee of council. When this arose 2 weeks ago, I put a motion before council that will be debated later tonight to instruct staff to produce amendments to all of our policies to deal with the definition of an accessory building, the size of an accessory building, the siting of accessory buildings, and so forth and so on, because I think that's where this is a problem. We've never had a situation where the town has been taken advantage of in the sense that a large building has been put up and then there's a threat of a change of use. It's usually been something like a barn or a riding facility. The other thing that concerns me is the permit process. The town does issue something called a municipal approval, which is basically, as Councillor Nix has explained, a verification that an application of this nature, square footage, meets our zoning and official plan. The applicant takes that to the building department at the county, and the building department will consider a building permit based on that. The applicant takes it to the roads department at the county, and the roads department will consider a temporary entrance application, likewise with septic, likewise with the NVCA permit. Interestingly, the NVCA permit, which I've been able to get a copy of, and I don't know if it's been released anywhere else, indicates that there's some 1,800 cubic meters of fill destined for this property. That is the equivalent of 180 tandem dump trucks. It is true that there are conditions, and very stringent conditions, attached to that permit that control how that fill is to be used in that area. But I have serious concerns that our own fill bylaw has not been followed. And I don't want to get legal or technical, but this is a debate that I think is ongoing. But my plain reading of our fill bylaw is that it was not observed. And possibly because the assumption was that the NVCA was taking care of fill issues. Well, I don't know. But I'm not happy. I hope my motion later tonight passes, because that at least is going to address some of these issues so that we don't see a replication of this in the future.
Thank you.
So you won't know me yet. I'm Alexis Levine. I bought Fred Von Vey's property on Mono Center Road. So nice to meet you, and sorry to be meeting you in this way. I had really decided to stay out of town politics, and here I am 6 weeks in, standing in front of you. So I've failed in that regard. I'm not here to accuse anyone of incompetence or make anyone's life difficult. I appreciate everybody's trying to do their best with what sounds like a very difficult situation. I live right across the street from this property. My kids are going to be drinking the water that's coming out of this downstream stream. So I have some concerns about this. And I've been talking to folks, I've been talking to neighbors, and I've been listening today. And I'm hearing things that are making me nervous. There's obviously a transparency or dialogue issue, I understand. There was a conversation in May. Folks haven't been brought up to speed. We're all up to speed now, we're all here now. There are clearly environmental concerns. You've got a bylaw for the Oak Ridges designated environmental areas that says you can't have fuel tanks on properties that have a water aquifer. Well, why is it okay to have fuel tanks or fuel storage here? You've got a zoning bylaw that says pretty clearly that if you're going to have a home industry, and let's call this a home industry for a second, that if you're going to have a home industry, that it has to be adjacent to an approved farm and the secondary, not the primary use of the property. I'm not sure I see an approved farm here. I'm not sure I see what the primary use of the property is other than this. It seems pretty clear that this is the primary use of the property. You have a development bylaw that allows you to apply development charges on any non-residential activity that doesn't have an exemption. There's an exemption for agriculture, but there's certainly no exemption for an industrial fabricating facility. So I don't know Mr. Clark. I'm sure he's a nice guy. I think people generally should be able to do what they want to do with their property. I generally don't like NIMBYism. I think, you know, when people complain about property values, that's not where you can't make planning decisions on that basis. But that's not what this is, guys. This is real concerns about the environment. There are some concerns about road safety, but it's also a concern about precedent. If you can do this here, what's to stop me from saying, gee, I really am enthusiastic about mixing paint. I'm going to start a paint mixing cement and aggregates hobby facility on my property. You know, this is a community, and I bought in this community because I wanted a community that was agricultural, that was rural, the dark skies, the beautiful roads, the beautiful scenery. To move in and discover that I've got an industrial fabricating facility across the road, it's a little bit of a surprise and really isn't exactly what I thought was coming. So I understand the concern, I understand the challenges that you have, but I do think you've got tools available to you. You could impose development charges today. You could take the position that this is off the zoning bylaw, and that you can't have issued the town approval that you've issued. You can try and retract that because of the home industry issue. There are tools that are available to you. Should you review the bylaws? Sure. But there are tools that I would submit are open to this council, and I'd ask you to think about using them. I don't know if that means suspending the permit you have granted. I don't know if that means, but this isn't just about being fair to the residents. It's also about being fair to Mr. Clark, because if he's going to spend a ton of money here building this facility and then turn around and discover that he can't use it for what he wants to use it for, and he's going to end up getting fined or there's going to be enforcement, I'm not sure that's fair to him either. We need to make sure if we're going to solve the problem, let's try and solve it now before the horse has left the barn. Anyway, so I'm new here, and this really was not the way I wanted to introduce myself to the community. I'm sorry about that. Pleasure to meet all of you, and hopefully I won't have to speak again at one of these meetings for a few years. But Levine, Levine.
Ed Craker, Airport Road. I'd like to speak with respect to the fill bylaw and whether or not it should be applied here. As you know, I've been involved in revising our fill bylaw, and I've read this, even this last week, I've read our existing fill bylaw a number of times. And yes, section 3.1 of the fill bylaw says that, for example, if a building is going to be put up, the landowner will receive approval to bring in fill. And there are a number of situations like that. By the way, with respect to the conservation authorities, the conservation authorities are listed as one of the, in section 3.1 as having authority over fill, but that, Ms. Kehoe was correct in that May of 2017, that was changed. And the conservation authorities now have exceeded that authority to the municipalities. Where there's a conservation authority within a municipality, the conservation authority relies on the municipal fill bylaw. And so, for example, in the revised fill bylaw that I've put together. Conservation Authority is not included in there anymore for that reason. Getting back to the issue of whether this operation should have been regulated in terms of fill, there's no question in my mind. Statement 3.2 is a notwithstanding clause, which says in spite of, and I agree that there probably isn't a permit required by Mr. Clark to bring in the fill, but clause 3.2 says notwithstanding that, any operation that brings in fill or alters the land is required to abide by the remainder of the fill bylaw, and Mr. Dunmore is correct in section 6 something. It makes reference to attachment B, and attachment B clearly lays out, for example, no fill on weekends or statutory holidays, no more than 100 truckloads a day. There must be, prior to the getting approval, there must be submission of proof that the soil that's going to be brought in is not contaminated. And to say that, there are a number of other conditions, but to say that he was totally exempt, I've reviewed a lot of fill bylaws in the province of Ontario in the process of revising ours. And I dare say that if we are allowing someone to bring in a couple hundred loads of fill without any regulation, we're the only town in community in the province of Ontario doing that. I totally disagree with any legal opinion that the notwithstanding clause doesn't apply.
Good evening. My name is Patricia Lang, and I live on here Ontario Street, right here in Mono. And together with my husband, we raised our 3 kids here, and we've lived here for 40 years. We came here and embraced peace and quiet and a rural lifestyle. That's what kept us here. For me to be here tonight and to speak takes great effort. However, I have to express my thoughts of what's happening in my neighborhood. Since this issue of the Gooseville Tavern and Smokey's Garage came to light in May, there is much anguish in our area. One neighbor expressed, "I am afraid," while some have broken down in tears. To be subjected to the stress that produces these emotions in the town of Mono is unacceptable. Residents talk about property devaluation. Since the May 14th council meeting, a neighbor near Smokey's property had to reduce his property substantially in order to be able to sell. This happened in a strong real estate market. Most folks can't afford financial loss. This is also unacceptable. Most major renovations took place on the existing home from October 2018 until June 2019. Without a building permit, a permit, there was nothing posted. Why was this allowed to happen? No permit was ever posted. According to the bylaws, the building permit is required when electrical or plumbing is involved. However, there was non-stop construction vehicles parked or hidden behind large industrial dumpsters next to the house throughout the 9-month period. Why was this ignored? The owner or principal behind the operation describes the proposed 14,000 square foot and 3,000 square foot warehouse buildings as a workshop and storage for his hobby. Yet an article published in the Orangeville Citizen, which I have here, on September 5th, 2019, and a magazine called Motoring, authored by Brian Lockhart, boasts about producing custom-built motorcycles. On Smokey's website, he says, "We stand behind what we sell and give full warranty on each build." The website also states that Smokey's does custom design, engineering, fabricating, painting, and build from the ground up. Does this sound like a humble hobby or an industrial endeavor? The enterprise is located between 2 correction curves on Mono Center Road. with 3 driveways, one of which is on here, Ontario Street. The corner is unsafe to start with, I know. I drive out of it routinely. And then you add alcohol from the private bar, numerous vehicles coming and going, Smokey's 2 18-wheeler transport trucks, especially in winter weather, and at the end result could be onerous and carry many liabilities. There is palpable anger in our community over this project and over the perceived lack of local government support for the majority of its residents who you are elected to represent. A statement was made that Smokey's Workshop is the same as a horse barn or arena. I object to that line of reasoning. A horse barn arena does not bring fear to a community or devalue adjacent properties. This industrial-like enterprise, which requires a certain amount of toxic lubrication, cleaning chemicals for manufacturing, is to be built on top of, I have 250 loads of fill, unverified fill, next to a significant tributary of the Nottawasaga River. It is also within meters of endangered and protected Camilla wetlands. How can you stand by and allow this to happen? The Smokey property is zoned agricultural and residential. In its wisdom, Mono set aside a land for an industrial park near the Mono Water Tower on Highway 9, and that's where this belongs. I request the town solicitor be hired to sort through this contentious issue and solve it in favor of the residents. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michael Lang. I'm Patricia's husband. We live on here, Ontario Street. And she said we've been here 40 years. I'd like to emphasize the importance of the 2 correction lines. There is always, almost certainly always, excessive speed on Mono Center Road. We have cars, trucks, motorcycles pulling up behind us. We clearly look to the left, to the right, stop, pull out, and someone's on your tail. Honking, wanting to pass, giving you the finger or the fist. That's the type of corner that is. Smokey will be pulling out with 18-wheelers. There'll be delivery trucks delivering supplies to his manufacturing industrial complex. Hundreds of noisy motorcycles with straight pipes, usually, will be visiting this facility on a weekly or a monthly or an annual basis. Those sounds to most of us are disturbing. When you add alcohol to that mix coming from a private bar, as Patricia said, the results could be onerous and libelous. These driveways are not built for commercial standards for 18-wheel transports to pull in and out of, taking products or show cars or show motorcycles throughout North America. In the meantime, since October 2018, I walk here Ontario Street almost daily with my dog. And I go down past Smokey's or the other way. There are at times, occasionally, where I have picked up nails and drywall screws. I can speak. I don't need a mic. Anyways. Okay, would you give that a shot? Okay. I only bring this up to emphasize that normally, even with a massive
facility like the other way 1,000 feet down the road from me. $1.5 million pool house was just built, and there were no nails or screws dropped by the contractors. My wife has had a brand new car, 2 flats so far. One of them a couple of days ago. I've got the bill right there for the fix. There are nails about yay long or screws that these dumpsters and vehicles are dropping when they exit here Ontario Street, exit onto Mono Centre Road. This is just not acceptable. And Smokey has 3 driveways. Back about a year and a half ago, I was assured that one of those driveways would be closed, as Mike Dunmore said, and put back to its natural state. If there's a culvert there, it must be removed, the gate must be removed, and the ditch must be put back to its natural state. They assured me that would be done about a year ago, and I just ask that somebody here please follow up on that and either post it to your website or let me know, please. The bylaw does not allow a property to have 3 driveways. If it's a farm, it's allowed 2. And I don't know if this is a farm, as Mr. Levine stated. A question, please. Was there ever a traffic flow analysis done on this Smokey site? I'm just asking this because I do accept the fact that maybe we didn't think of these things, and I'm just suggesting that we kindly think of them and maybe take action on them. So we need a traffic analysis. And in the summertime, with increased tourism in Mono, which we all like, there's going to be people that don't know these curves, don't know the roads, don't observe the speed limits. The speed limit's quite low, 70 and 60 in that area, and most people can't adjust to that speed. And I'm just suggesting that you put a mix of motorcycles in there, especially on a nice sunny July day, and there might be 100 or 200 motorcycles in there too. So that's one question. The next question is, we were talking about, Mr. Dunmore was saying that the fill permits issued by the Nonosaga Conservation Area say that it was within the zone that was acceptable. I have a document here. That says that a provincially significant wetland within 120 meters of this subject land, this property we're talking about, it is a local wetland adjacent to a watercourse. Now, back to industrial, even if it's hobby, there's going to be chemicals, paints, lubricants for lathes and CNC machines to cut parts for the cars and cut parts to build these motorcycles. How are these chemicals going to be disposed of? And will there be a hole drilled in the floor? Will there be a pipe going out into the wetlands? These are serious concerns. And I think they do deserve being addressed. Another document here relating to that property says the severed lot, or pardon me, the proposed use for the severed lot is residential and managed. The retained lot, that was the one that was just sold. The retained lot would include the existing dwelling, a storage shed, and servicing, including the existing laneway, septic system, drilled well, and a geothermal system, as well as a wetland, or woodland, wetland and watercourse. The existing residential and managed forest uses would continue. There were 14,000 trees planted on that original 100 acres that was severed about a year and a half ago. That definitely is an environmental leap. Lovely piece of property that is subject to very strict, rigid rules. When you put 14,000 trees and get tax breaks because of that, it comes under another act. Are the fill permits and soil test results available to view?
They're provided as part of the application process. We're trying to assess what's available, and we currently have a request from a representative of the association, I shall call it, and we're working through what's available that we can provide immediately and what would have to be requested through the, so we're just working through that right now as to protection of the individual as well, right?
Well, Michael,
So this
thank
it
you.
is available, it's
Okay.
just a matter of how it comes to you.
Okay, well, I really, as a long-term resident, citizen and taxpayer, I somehow or another feel that this should be public information.
And out of respect to all residents, we're just going through to make sure that we go through the proper process.
Okay, fair enough,
Right,
Mike,
it's-
as long as we can get to the
These
bottom
are
of
parts
it.
of the application and.
Good,
and
thanks,
parts of the
Michael.
MVCA
Thank you,
requirements, right?
thank you. And are you, council, willing to work to help have his permits rescinded, including his building permits? At least rescinded to the point where our council, our mono council, can get into this issue and look through it and analyze it and see whether or not it's a justified endeavor in this community.
Yeah, but I don't see how we can rescind anything at this point. I think we would end up in a legal battle.
Maybe that's where we're going to wind up.
If, you know, that would just, my initial comment. I
Yeah.
don't know what it is that we can do in order to put.
Could we contact council and get some opinions?
Sure.
We have been in touch.
Yep.
We are getting legal advice.
Like
But we
from-
certainly can't rescind a building permit because we didn't issue it. We can't rescind the NVCA permit because we didn't issue it. The only thing we did is send a letter to the county saying, well, we didn't use the word unfortunately, but
Yeah.
that is the case. Unfortunately, this application meets our zoning bylaw, which, as
Okay.
John has pointed out,
But we have to use common sense, and we have to project and look into the future. And it's a lot easier to ask for forgiveness than get permission. And we fear that once he gets this endeavor going, he's going to come in here, and then you can change mono can change the zoning. It's not a county
I
thing.
share all the fears that you have.
Okay.
I share
The other thing, an example, dealing with this thing about we can't rescind the permits. In Mulmer, years ago, an organization came up and wanted to build a motocross track. The council said no. They came back again, the council said no. They bypassed them and went to the county. The county goes, yeah, the town stepped in and said, it's our land, it's our property, it's our community. We don't want a noisy motocross operation in our township. And I think here we may be able to express our concern as a community that we do not want this type of industrial look-alike industrial endeavor in our community. And I think that if we can just pull together as a community, we can make some progress. Yeah. So thank you.
Michael, if I could ask you
Yes.
a question about the document that you were quoting from, was that the decision of the appeal to Mono's denial of the severance?
Yes.
Okay. In fairness, that probably, the undertakings that you quoted there in terms of how the land would be treated may have been made by the previous owner and not...
No, it was made by the consultant that was hired by the individual that was appealing, by a company called Questa.
But by the previous owner before he sold to Mr. Clark?
That's correct.
Okay. So Mr. Clark, if he'd done his due diligence in purchasing that land, must have been aware of the controversy over the severance and the fact that it went to the OMB, and the OMB upheld the severance application subject to certain conditions.
Yeah, which are pretty strict.
Just to the issue of documents, I have made personally a Freedom of Information application to the county for the 3 applications that they have processed, not only asking for the applications, but the permits that may have flowed from those applications. I take the position, frankly, that these documents should be available as a matter of public record to anyone who requests them, subject to appropriate redactions as specified by the Freedom of Information legislation. But I don't think people should have to go through an FOI application to see documents that are filed by citizens for things they want to do on their land. But there will be redactions, and I think what Staffy's trying to say to you is we've got to make certain that all those are made before those documents are released. I hope they will be released without an FOI formal process.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So I apologize for speaking twice. I'm sure we don't want everybody here to speak twice, or we'll be here for quite some time. I wonder if I could just propose a quick way forward. The association has some pretty good legal resources available to it as well. The town's engaged counsel. Council's getting opinions. I think it'd actually be useful for the association, or at least a couple of council identified by the association, to have a conversation with council for the town and see if there's some options to move forward here. Because certainly, reading the bylaws, we've identified some things that are interesting, that are worth talking about, particularly to the point about the difference between a riding arena that's adjacent to a farm versus an accessory building that's not adjacent to an approved farm. That the zoning issue would be one thing to talk about. And I wonder if, Your Worship, you'd be open to having the town's council spend a couple of hours with myself. I practice law with Fred Van Vey, with legal resources that we have, to just talk through what the options are, to make sure that we've considered them, and to make sure that you have the benefit of knowing what we know and vice versa, so that we can have a properly informed conversation about what the options are.
We can certainly discuss that and see what is available to us. Mr. Dunmore, you're making notes? Okay, so at this point, you've got the information, the updates. We all are aware of what the situation is. We are waiting for the next step. I don't know if anybody else on council wants to make any other comments about it. But yes, Mr. McDowell.
My apologies for being late. Slept in. No, I didn't sleep in. I'm a creature of habit. Mr. Levine, I appreciate your suggestion, and I personally would be very happy with getting all the ideas of anybody who has them. We've been suggested by Michael Lang that we might rescind this. We have to deal within the law. Unfortunately or fortunately, I think it's fortunately, and most of the time, but so that we don't know how it's possible to rescind a building permit that fits within the requirements of the Building Act in Dufferin. However, I'd be pleased to discuss it and to see if there's any way out of this. Somebody at the beginning of the presentation, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, asked how we as council were feeling about this. And I can tell you we're all in a state of shock. When we first heard about it, and we heard about the plan to have a motorcycle bazaar, and I just quite couldn't believe that this was happening in Mono. I'd say that I can speak for all the people on the council here in saying that their interest is maintaining Mono as a good place to live and a place that respects its environment. And we do this through the regulations and through the various people, such as Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority, our environmental protection, mapping, etc. I'm concerned about what I hear about garbage, and I think that something will be done by that by our town, by our Mr. Dunsmore. I would be very concerned, Michael, if I was picking up nails in my tires on a regular basis too. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. Oh, yeah.
I'm Al Ald. I just live on First Line. So, Ald, A-U-L-D. So when we had the last meeting, Mr. Clark said he was going to move the venue, which he did. He moved the venue. And one of the questions that was asked was, well, what about all the people that are going to show up on Mono Center Road? And he said over and over again that they won't get in. They won't get in. But when you drove past that Smokey's Garage the Sunday morning, there were hundreds of people there, tents and campers. I don't know if anyone else has seen that. Anytime he's had one of his events that the people are not going to be allowed in, they are all over his property. They're littered all over his property the next morning. So, I mean, I get you guys have to make decisions based on what's presented. You can't make decisions based on these people are lying to me, because you can't. You have to take them for what they say. And Lori, I've always been a big fan. So, and I know you've been here for forever, and I trust that you've got our best interests. So, but what can we do? So, next time he has a Smokies event that's somewhere else and has 400 of his closest friends stay over, like I can have on my property, I can have a family reunion and I can have 400 people there, but I'm not going to do it every weekend, or I'm not going to do it 4 times in the summer. So what can we do as residents to, like, do we have to make a phone call? Do we complain to somebody? Do we say, hey, so that, I think that's what we're looking for too. How can we help without breaking the law, without, following proper procedures, and say, look, this isn't acceptable. And maybe Mr. Smokey will just say, I've had enough of the complaints, I've had enough of the phone calls, I've had enough of the checks, and maybe he just gives up. Maybe let us know what we can do.
Well, in terms of, for sure, if you see any infractions in terms of safety, et cetera, that's an OPP call.
Yeah.
As in terms of bylaw enforcement, if there is illegal parking, if there's noise infractions, et cetera.
Yeah.
So it's bylaw enforcement.
Like how many tents is too many, or campers? And I'm not expecting you to know that.
Yeah, no.
But let us know somehow. Get the information to us so know who we can call and make a difference, right? And maybe we can just end it there. Okay.
It's good comments, and we have a very antiquated events bylaw that dates from about 1985. Maybe we should dust that off and have a look at it.
I like the sound of that. Okay.
Thank you.
My second and last turn. I think the gentleman who just spoke was really a little too kind to the members of council. I think you've had enough notice since May 15th to have ordered your staff to have investigated this situation. But you all sat back, your staff all sat back, and you all waited for the event to happen. That's not running Mono. That's a cop-out. There's a 16-foot bar built into that house on the corner. What does that tell you? 16 feet. What happens when those events start to occur that you find he's doing industrial, which he's going to do, and you know it, and you've known it for a long time? It didn't seem to matter. You have 2 choices. You can fine him, or you can get a rezoning into commercial. Are those 2 positive alternatives to the mess that you guys have created? No, because they both destroy the neighborhood. You haven't got an answer for this. Your answer was on May 15th and 4 months afterwards. Isn't it curious tonight that Mr. Early's mic is on, but there's no Mr. Early? Last week on the 20th of November, you had a council meeting. He left right after the business of it and before the discussion about this subject. When I asked somebody who works here, I said, why would he do that? He says, ask the mayor. And he's not here again tonight on the same subject. Is there something wrong going on here that we don't understand? And Mr. Dunsmore, from your standpoint, you had all sorts of fill trucks come, mostly with fill. Then you had the shale, and then you had rocks and concrete. And I have somebody in this room that saw the rocks and concrete. What do you say to that? That isn't a floor for the driveways. That's part of contamination.
Why wouldn't it be?
Why wouldn't it be?
Why wouldn't it be an appropriate
they were far
base?
too big for what this man saw. Okay? This whole excuse behind the Conservation Authority is nothing an excuse. When you were asked for a copy of the permit, you should have been ready today with an answer, not something to investigate later. These people live the problem. I circulated a letter to council in their usual fashion, this is a week and a half ago, about the problem with the article and everything else. I got no reply at all. I sent another letter or something else, no reply from council. I think the citizens deserve more than token engagement. We don't even get that. So figure what's going to happen when this thing falls apart. The responsibility is with your senior people and with the councilors. You've done it all. You can stop it. And you could have stopped it. But now you got to find a way to do it with no excuses. You caused it, you fix it. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we're going to continue on with our agenda. As information becomes available, we'll certainly make sure that it is posted on the website if it's pertinent to the situation. And as always, you can contact anybody on council, and we will share with you anything that we've had in terms of any updates. So thank you very much for your comments and your input. And feel free to stay because we're going to be discussing the budget shortly.
Who should our point of contact be about this subject from today on? You say you're going to investigate it. Who should we talk to? Give us a person who's going to be responsible.
For
discussing, calling, and saying what's happening here. Somebody should be up to date daily or weekly on this. Thank you.
Okay, so if we can continue on with the unfinished business, is fire mark. I thought he was standing there.
There's a delay.
Oh, hi, Rusha. Nice to see you. We weren't sure whether or not you'd be able to make it tonight.
You just came
see it. I see listed over here that has one question.
Okay, so if we can resume under unfinished business, the Fire Marque Indemnification Technology Program. And Mr. Early has provided us with his comments.
Oh, yeah, that's what we're talking about.
So as far as discussion on this item, I did ask Mr. Early if, or Mr. Luca possibly got the request in terms of how many actual fire, structure fires that we experienced.
Actually, it wasn't very many. For just for 2019, there was a house fire in the Orangeville fire area and a non-residential structure fire in the Caledon area. Assuming under this program, definitely the house would fall under. Not sure about the non-residential structure.
So.
It's not a big number.
No, and so my concern is that this is a whole bunch of paperwork for very little return. If we want to pursue the same ability to recoup whatever's in an insurance policy, it might be something that we want to attempt to do on our own. I don't know, but I just don't see the point of engaging with this particular company for, as I say, it's another agreement, and it doesn't make any sense to me. So, Councillor Nix.
I don't share those views, and the point is, whatever the town of Mono does, we're going to have a good portion of the north end of the municipality where this agreement is in effect, because the Shelburne District Fire Board has signed an agreement with Fire Marque. My own view is that this coverage is included in, as far as I know, almost all household insurance policies that cover structures. And it hasn't been collected because most municipalities, and unless you disagree with me if you want, don't have the expertise to understand these insurance. I don't know how many companies there are in Canada that insure structures, but there's a lot, and all the policies are different. What the expertise that Fire Marque has built up is understanding these insurance policies and knowing how to get this money. I agree, it's not a lot. It is going to be collected in the north part of Mono. I think it would make sense, well, even if the Shelburne District Fire Board hadn't signed the agreement, it would make sense for Mono to sign it, because we're leaving some money on the table that's not now being collected. I think the best estimate that Chris Carrier has for the town of Mono, I'm not sure if it was for the whole town or just the northern portion, was $12,000 to $14,000 a year. It was something in that range. But here's the point. That money can only be used by fire departments for three things: training, their capital budget, and I forgot the third, but it doesn't matter. They can't use it for operating costs. We know we have some capital expenditures with our fire departments coming up. It's a small amount of money, but if we don't take this insurance money, then we as taxpayers are going to have to pay it, okay? So I think we should sign the agreement, collect this amount of money every year, and then when we get the next capital expenditure for one of our fire departments, we're partly covered.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have a question, I think, for Mark, and then I have a comment. Is this something that the municipalities should be agreeing to, or the fire department? We hear that Shelburne Fire Department is agreeing to this, and when it came before Rosemont, I was the chair there, and I suggested we shouldn't deal with this because I thought it was a municipal matter. Could you clarify that?
Well, I would say that in many of the cases that are quoted by Firemark, their clients are municipalities. That being said, they are larger municipalities that probably are the masters of their own domain, so to speak, with their fire departments. So, you know, Thunder Bay, London, that sort of thing, they all have their own fire departments, and you know, if you're dealing with one, you're dealing with the other. Be like dealing with Orangeville, for instance. So I don't think it really makes a difference whether it's the municipality or the fire department. Dealing with the fire department is creating the issues that we would have in that you have one fire department that's moved to have this agreement with Firemark, and then we're left with 3 other fire departments where we wouldn't.
So we could have a fire department making a decision that affects the residents of Mono with respect to perhaps their taxes, etc. I have a comment.
What Mr. Carrier indicated to us when he was here was that they could only collect in Mono if Mono changed their fees and charges bylaw. So if Mono says, no, we don't want to deal with Firemark, and they don't change their fees and charges bylaw, I would think then the only option we would have at a staff level is to request the information from Shelburne Fire when they have a fire to do it ourselves.
My comment is, Your Honor, is about premiums. And I was suspicious of Firemark's suggestion that this would not affect resident premiums. So I asked an actuary for an opinion. Full disclosure, the actuary is my son Blair. And he is a casualty insurance actuary, and he is a consultant's consultant. He's quite well up there. I provide him with all the documents from Firemark and our council agenda documents, which you prepared, Mark, and I asked him if this proposal was likely to affect the residents' premiums, and if so, how much. The information I got from him is as follows. Firemark has indicated that the insurance industry creates their insurance premiums based on their forecast of future payouts, and they said there has not been any increase in premiums, and they didn't expect there would be. This is correct that they do make their forecast on the basis of what they expect to pay. But this forecast is based on their payment history. It's based on what they have paid out in the last 3, 4, 5 years. And every few years, they'll assess their payout, and they will adjust their premiums to suit. And very clearly, if the payouts increase, then the premiums will increase. It just can't be another way. It's not built, the premiums are not, this payout to the fire departments are not built into their premiums because there have been no payouts in the past. Get me?
Yeah, can I just make a point to that though?
Sure.
When a house
It's not
burns
finished.
down and the insurance company has to pay $300,000 or $400,000 to have that house rebuilt, the payment of $500 for having a truck coming out to do something about it is so minuscule that it wouldn't even be noticed.
If it's 5,000, it will. It's more likely that. I think Mr. Carrier had suggested that it would be something like 12 or 14,000 perhaps per year. Is that correct?
That was the number provided.
Right. And so the problem with that is that when the insurance company will have to factor that, their costs into that, and they'll also have to pay the middleman, who's Firemark now, to get their 30%. So in fact, the premiums will go up equivalent to about twice that. I think we had an email from Mr. Evans, and it was, I don't know the insurance agent there, but he was quoting 2.5 times. My son said premiums will probably go up on average twice as much as what Mona will collect. In other words, Mona will ding the residents for twice what they get out of this program. The area that gets it difficult here is that what is the designated territory that they look at in terms of a group? Is it just the town of Mono, or is it other towns that may include Firemark? So it could be that if everybody around us goes with this proposal, then our rates will go up as well, whether we're getting any money from them or not. I guess I question the appropriateness of using Firemark, as eventually our residents will pay for it, and they'll cost them about twice what we will gain.
Feeling that our residents will pay for it through their taxes, because then we have to pay the capital.
We still will have to pay for our fire coverage, and it's also equitable throughout the municipality. If we go with one specific contract area, it's not equitable for the rest of the residents.
Well, I was all excited about accessing a pool of money in the safes and vaults of insurance companies in London. But the business about premiums potentially going up causes me to have some pause. Surely there is some history out there with other municipalities of either the municipalities themselves trying to recover this money or using a third party like Firemark. And it would be, and this I think was hinted at in Mr. Evans' email, that it did have a deleterious effect on insurance rates. I know that there's some pressure because Shelburne is doing this for us to make a decision, but I'm wondering whether we can make a decision absent further information about the impact on premiums.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that too, that maybe we need to do a little more investigation with people who already are signed up. And I'm sorry I don't remember, how long is, when we sign, if we sign on the dotted line, is that for a year, 5 years, 2 years? One?
We've never received their agreement, so I don't know. It could
We don't
probably be
know?
anywhere between 1 and whatever, how many years you want to. Unless Fred has more information as to what Shelburne has in their agreement, I haven't seen a formal agreement.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a resolution in front of us, which directs staff to bring forward a draft agreement between the town of Mono and Firemark for emergency response recovery for all fire areas in Mono, and that staff prepare an amendment to Bylaw 2019-4 fees and charges to authorize collection of emergency response recovery fees. So, do I have a mover? Moved by Nix, and is there a seconder? Well, this won't go away, so to speak. I mean, Firemark is out there. They've been approaching us for, I don't know, 10 years or more. Well, I met them at a conference and they were hitting me up then. So that was like 10 years ago. So, so with that in mind, I don't think they're going to go away overnight. So we can still do our research. We can still, but to actually go into an agreement, it looks like nobody wanted to second the motion. So.
Well, I was only going to do that so there could be more discussion, but I think perhaps we've had enough discussion and we can move on. Yep.
I don't think we've ever tabled a motion, at least not recently, and I'm wondering whether or not I could move to table this motion subject to further research.
I don't think you need a seconder for that.
I don't, and I don't think there's a lot of debate allowed
Yep.
either.
Okay, so tabled.
Can we get some further direction? I think I think at this point in time, we're dealing with insurance companies that don't necessarily want us to be seeking charges that they're collecting premiums for, and will now be dealing with other municipalities that are on side with Firemark. So I'm just, in terms of the information I'm going to gather, I just don't know how tainted it may be.
And if I could just point out, in terms of the insurance premiums in this area, our neighbor, the municipality to the east, has already signed, or at least my understanding is they've signed with Firemark. So, okay.
So, motion to table, all in favor? Carries. Okay, on to resignation of Jason Runtas from the TRCA board. We didn't get to this at the last meeting. So the discussion from Mr. Simpson, deputy clerk, is that the other people that had applied initially be contacted and see if any are interested, and if not, then we'd have to re-advertise.
So all but one person indicated that they'd be willing to stand. So Diane Walmsley said that due to other personal commitments that are coming up in her future, she would be unable to take the position on.
Can I
Yes.
assume that, can I suggest that we take the option of putting in camera at the end of the meeting and explaining what previous applicants?
Okay. Okay, so now we're on to the budget. Mr. Luca.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. Let me just bring the budget up. So since the last meeting, the special meeting we had last Wednesday, Council directed staff to find $20,000 in labor costs on page 13, the roads operating. So this draft coming back before you, in discussions with the Director of Public Works, get down to page 13. So, so all the red numbers are numbers that got changed. That should add up to 20, except there was one line that council authorized Mike to add $1,500 for speed bumps. So it won't add up to exactly 20, so that's your difference of $1,500. So basically we're at 2%. The only other possible change, if you go to notes page 5, this was in discussion with Councillor Manctolo earlier today. The project that council wants to do is the signage on streams and waterways. Now there is an application for a grant with the county. That was not discussed with this budget. However, if you go to notes page 5, there's a 2019 final budget column. There's the bike pathway finding signage grant of $45,621. Based on the change, I'm assuming in the scope of that project, we will not spend that entire grant by next spring. So there's money in that budget to take on that project. So the only change I'm suggesting for this is just to that description, bike path wayfinding signage, is to add, I guess, the words stream signage. And then and hopefully the 45 should be more than enough to cover both projects.
I neglected at the outset to make a declaration of interest with regard to the contribution to the Orangeville Public Library, as my spouse works there. If the topic arises, I'll happily leave the room and ask that if there's a vote flowing, that the item for the library be separated out so I can participate in the main vote. And I will file this time a written declaration. I neglected to last time I filed for both meetings.
So my last comment, this is the meeting that council has designated for public input. We're on the council budget. This is now the budget with 2% inflationary increase, and under our processes where council presents this budget tonight to the public that's interested. The gallery seemed empty pretty quick. So if there's any comments from the public, now's the time to do it. And
I
then
think
the
since
idea
we-
is to come back to the next meeting with the final.
I think since we have some members of the public here, you should go through the budget line by line. No. I was kidding. You've done a masterful job. I'm extremely pleased with the bottom line.
Thank you, Mr. Luca. Is there any members of the gallery that want to ask any questions or have any comments on what we've done so far?
If you want to go line by line, we have a I haven't had a chance to go through it, but did we take the 24,000 for the HR consulting out?
Oh, yes.
But it's still in the notes on the current budget.
Oh, I'll have to remove that.
That's, I just want to make sure.
Yes.
It was removed.
But expenditure was removed.
Yeah, I thought it was. But
Yes.
I haven't got the.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, you just have a.
Yep.
In view of the earlier discussion tonight, it sounds like we could be into another fair-sized legal bill, and I'm presuming that's going to be covered off in reserves somewhere, but I just wonder, has that been, are we anticipating to provide for that sort of additional cost?
Well, we do have a substantial amount in there right now for the LPAT hearings in May for Greenwood. So it's just whether or not we spend it all, yeah.
And at this point, until we have evidence that there is a change of use, we don't know if there will be a hearing yet. We're making, I guess, the assumption, but until we have actual, I guess, evidence, there's no budget for it. But like the mayor says, we have a substantial dollar amount for the hearings, and then based what happens in May, hopefully that is enough money for everything.
And if we had to go to reserves, where would that be in reserves?
I guess at that time, if there would be a budget change, so then I would bring back a report to council at that time. Because it may not come from reserves, I mean, we can also reallocate an expenditure from somewhere else to cover it.
I have a question on page 10, line 1259, the community policing enhancement, and the figure of 64,758. Is that premised on an assumption of a 1.25 enhancement, or it looks like it to me?
That figure, the 64,758, that was in the last meeting dollar amount, and that's equivalent to half an officer.
Over and above our 0.75?
Of our current one. Now, if our increase is only allowed to go up to, say, 1, so that's a quarter, then you have some excess money there. And if that is the case, but I would recommend, or what we're recommending, is hold that difference, slot or put it into a reserve, and then you have a dollar amount next year in 2021 as an offset. If you want to go further.
I'd just like to bring council up to speed on back and forth with the OPP. Contrary to what we had been planning for and what our understanding was, we're now told that the OPP no longer deals in fractional increases. They're looking for an increase to either from 75 to 1 or from 75 to 1.5. And they are indicating that Treasury Board has changed their rules of engagement. I spoke to somebody from their financial branch today who contacted me to try and explain what the new rules were. And I suggested that going from 0.75 to 1 was probably inadequate for what we were hoping to accomplish with an increased enhancement. But going to 1.5 was probably too rich for us in one jump. If we were to have some sort of arrangement with a neighboring municipality to share that increase, that would be wonderful, but we don't have that. We could get it in the future, but we don't have it. So what I suggested to her was that I would be speaking to the matter tonight. I'd alert council of the fact that our options are really 1 or 1.5. However, I live in hope that we can convince them to follow through with the 1.25. I think we should leave it in the budget, and as you say, if we only get to increase by a quarter, then we have some money left over for next year, or conversely, find a way of convincing neighbors to share with us the extra person. So I am sort of optimistic that we might win this argument, but I'm not sure.
Okay, so we have a motion, but we need to do it in sections. Thank you. Okay, so the motion is that council approves the 2020 draft budget dated November 26, 2019, as amended, with the exception of page 27 and notes, library services. So you can stay for this one.
With the exception, of course.
Okay, so do you want to move it then? Yeah, okay, so moved by Martin, seconded by Magdalo. All in favor? Carries. And now, so the second motion is that council approves page 27 and notes, library services of the draft budget dated November 26, 2019. And moved by Nix and seconded by Martin. All in favor? Carried. And so now we're on to new business item 2, draft plastic bag bylaw. So thank you for the report, Mr. Simpson. So, is there any specific concerns or discussion? So we have a motion that council gives first reading to a bylaw to regulate checkout bags, and that staff be directed to forward this bylaw to the Regional Chief Justice of the Ontario Court of Justice, soliciting his feedback on this bylaw, following which staff bring this bylaw back for second reading. So moved by Nix and seconded by Martin. Any? Yeah?
I'm not against this referral, but I'd just like to have an explanation of why it's in there.
As this is likely to be the first bylaw of its type in Ontario, I think it's prudent to have it reviewed because it involves fines under the POA. So setting that fine amount is always subject to review and has to be approved by the Regional Chief Justice anyways. Plus, we've delved into this idea of graduated fines, which is something that is very uncommon, and there's not much in the way of precedence when it's not supported by other legislation. In our case, just by the Municipal Act. So again, I think getting this feedback now, as opposed to passing the bylaw and then finding that the Chief Justice isn't going to accept it, that we might as well find out now.
Your question is about the fines rather than the bylaw in general going through?
Specifically about the fines. However, you know, I think we'd welcome any other feedback as well.
As part of our intention here is public awareness and education, I was really hoping the press would stay until we had this bylaw or this motion in front of us, but they've gone home. I know you send them our agenda packages, Fred. However, do you think it would be possible just to cut this one motion out and mail it to the editors of both the local news and the radio station and say, I mean, well, if this is successful, we will be the first municipality in Ontario. And I think that should be brought to their attention, maybe in a covering letter.
And you think this is the appropriate stage, is not a bit early, or?
No, I mean, you're perfectly right. It may not pass the Chief Justice's muster, but in the meantime, it gives our residents notice that we are attempting to do something, which is to cut down on the use of plastic. It's a small step. We don't have much enforcement powers if we do get this through, but we're trying, and that's the message I think our residents should hear.
I don't see any reason then we can't issue a press release.
Good, good.
Just one small correction, the title is Regional Senior Justice, not Regional Senior Chief Justice. And Justice Curry, in all probability, will be simply looking at the fine issue and trying to get his head around the fact that normally when the Regional Senior Justice reviews bylaw fines, they're comparing to other municipalities. So I think we're right to send it because they're going to have to give that issue some thought. And the graduated fines, Fred and I had a discussion about this, and I could think of only a few statutes where there was provision for graduated fines, and they tended to be minimums set by the legislature. So that's an issue that they're going to have to turn their minds to as well.
Fred, could you explain to me the fine issue? I'm a little bit confused. Fine 513A says the fine for an offense is $500, and then down lower it says in our little chart there it says the set fine is $150.
So the idea is a set fine, of course, can be issued as a ticket. So that's $150. That is a single offense, first offense. And that can be enforced by law enforcement, by the issue of a ticket. And the offender can voluntarily pay that ticket. The graduated fines, that's a Part 3 summons. So that can't be done by ticket. That has to be taken to POA court in order to, because the individual has to be found guilty of the offense. So they're broken out, clearly stating that one is a set fine and one is a Part 3 POA. That's based on recommendations on using graduated fines. That the bylaw clearly states that this is a Part 3 POA offense. Did that answer the question?
No.
Okay.
So what does it mean in 513A when it says the fine for an offense is $500?
Right, so this is, we have a line that says for multiple offenses and for, what's the wording, not repeat. Continuing. subject's consent. Where did, yeah, I didn't think that was in there. Okay. All right, I will double check and make sure we've got the most current version of that, because actually, you're right, that line wasn't intended to be in there. There's just the 2 paragraphs in there, the repeat and the multiple offense. So my apologies.
Okay.
If we're just doing first reading, I think that's something we can address in second and third reading.
Okay, so we have the motions on the floor, moved by Nix and seconded by Martin. All in favor? Carries. So now we're on to item 3, OPP Policing Contract. Mr. Early.
Sorry, Your Worship.
That's okay.
So you've got the proposal, the draft renewal contract. It's a very unwieldy process that the OPP likes to use. So they're looking for a draft bylaw authorizing the execution of the agreement, and then they'll fix the contract up and send it back to us, and we'll sign it, and then we'll go through their process again. I have already told them, based on your previous resolution, that we'd be looking at a 4-year term, but they still want us to reconfirm that with them. So at this point in time, we're looking for council to authorize the agreement with the OPP. The whole issue of the FTE, I will also be addressing in the same process when I send this back to them. Although that will not, does not need to be in the contract, and as it was put to me by the OPP, there is an approval process that they would need to use for the additional FTE that would be outside of the contract, and it would affect timings.
Okay. So we have a motion that we introduce and give the necessary readings to a bylaw authorizing the town of Mono to enter into an agreement with Her Majesty the Queen and Right of Ontario as represented by the Solicitor General, substantially in the form as attached as Schedule A to the bylaw, and that it be signed by the mayor and the clerk for the town of Mono, sealed and engrossed in the bylaw book. Moved by Martin, second by Creelman. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carries. And on to item 4, the portable ramp subsidy program request. So, any discussion on the item?
We have prepared a draft resolution that goes further than the recommendation.
Right. So this is what I've got in front of me?
Correct.
Okay, so I can read it out so we have an idea. The council approves the request to subsidize $250 of the cost to purchase a portable wheelchair ramp, and that it be funded from council's 2019 donation budget, and that council directs staff to implement an accessible ramp subsidy policy similar to that of the town of Orangeville.
Should we say 2020?
We still have funds left in 19. So you're moving this? Okay. And second by Nix. Any further discussion? Yes?
How do we let people know that this is available? This is something we can do?
Yeah, we'll start obviously with the council on brief. That'll be the first thing that'll go out, and we'll put the policy together and get it up again on the website. May even do some form of press release as well.
So all in favor? Carries. And number 5, notice of motion by Deputy Mayor Creelman regarding the residential fence bylaw. And did you want to speak to it, John?
This was precipitated by the construction of a fence down in the Golden Room terribly out of character with the neighborhood, to put it mildly. And while it doesn't address that, and I'm not sure that we have any mechanism to address what's going on there, this hopefully will make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again. Other municipalities, and I think I sent Fred a copy of the Hamilton bylaw, regulate such things as fence height and type in residential areas. Obviously, the fence in front of a house does not necessarily have to be the same height and materials as the fence to the side and the rear of a house in terms of a backyard. But I think we need to have something in place. It's never been necessary before, but what this construction job on the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall points out is that we have a weakness that we need to address.
Okay, so the motion, I'll just read it out. Whereas the town of Mono does not currently regulate the height and type of residential fencing, and whereas other municipalities control such things as fence height and type in residential areas, therefore be it resolved that Mono staff prepare for council's consideration a bylaw regulating fencing in residential areas, addressing issues including but not limited to maximum height, materials, and differentiation between side and backyard versus front yard fences. So moved by Creelman, the seconder, second by Mankolo. Any further discussion?
I think it's appropriate to discuss this now. I requested David Trotman to look at this, and I think you said you were going to visit the site and tell us if there was anything within our present bylaws which could be used to control this.
So we did get to see the site a couple of weeks ago, actually, and I take empathy with its flavor. You know, there's, it's hard to control color, for example, and there, in other municipalities, cases where, you know, neighbors say haven't gotten along, and the one who builds it within his property limits decides to paint the outside of it sort of fluorescent purple or something. So these things happen, right? But generally, the approach has been, certainly in Barrie years ago, was with a similar situation that beyond the plane, the geometric plane of the facade, the front elevation of the building or the house, that the fence gets reduced to a height that has some sense of scale to the streetscape. I don't know if it's changed since then, but it was about a meter, or half a meter, about a half a meter there. So that's one of the key things, I think, with respect to front yard fencing is height. Material type might be a bit of a trickier issue.
The question was whether there's anything in our existing bylaws.
Well, no, I thought Councillor Mankdal said, have I had a chance to see the site yet?
Well, I did. I asked if there was anything in our regulations.
No, not in the zoning bylaw, no, sorry.
The Hamilton bylaw does speak to materials. It says, for instance, you can't use barbed wire in a residential area. It says that you can't use sort of a solid steel fence and corrugated materials. I mean, it doesn't talk about color, I don't think, and I don't know that we can get that detail, but I think we can certainly look to the issue of the maximum heights and hopefully materials that are used because the materials here, I think it is a steel. I think it's a corrugated steel construction or plastic or something of that nature.
Okay. So if there's nothing further, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Carries. And the next notice of motion regarding accessory buildings, Deputy Mayor?
Yes, and this is a motion to start the process, hopefully expedited and not caught up in the zoning bylaw approval process that we've budgeted for this year, to look at the definition of an accessory building, its appropriate uses, size proportionate to the residence and property, setback from property lines and neighboring residence, residences, shielding and landscape requirements, and obviously that would be very onerous for the very small accessory buildings, but maybe something that we could expect for larger ones. And of course, the issue of driveway entrances. A number of people have suggested to me that as a rule of thumb, an accessory building shouldn't be any larger than the residence itself. That's not to say that you wouldn't get applications that would be subject to a minor variance, but I think that we've discovered that we have a problem here, we have an issue here, and while this does not in any way target the existing proposition, it does hopefully address this the question of this happening again. Also, if I may, sorry, I also suggest here that while we're in the process of developing amendments to not only the zoning bylaw, but the method by which applications are vetted, that we inform property owners who have received municipal approval for accessory buildings over the past 12 months that any change in use, such as for commercial purposes, will require zoning and possibly other approvals, as well as potentially the payment of development charges. So I think that's putting those who have received approval, quite appropriately, on notice that were the use to be changed from what was approved, that there would be consequences, and that we should have a similar message incorporated into the town's application for municipal approval.
Mr. Early?
Treading carefully. No problem with most of the draft resolution. I think that the second to the last and further is quite onerous for staff. I mean, we can go back and track the building permits through the county, but you're talking about all buildings issued through the accessory building section of the zoning bylaw. That includes all hobby farms, all riding arenas on small lots, pool cabanas, small garages associated with residential dwellings. They're all issued under that same guideline, and I don't think that, for the most part, the intent that those are going commercial is probably not true, and this is, it just seems very onerous and probably overkill in most situations. I just throw that out for you.
My intent there was, notwithstanding the fact that it's onerous, I wanted everybody to be treated equally. I think it's very important that if we're going to give notice that there are consequences to change of use, that anyone in this position be notified. And I would ask council to consider keeping this provision in my motion at least until we find out how many letters would have to be sent out, how many applications we're looking at over the course of 12 months.
I think the resolution says we do it. We don't come back to you with how many that is.
Well, if I don't have support for that proposition, I'd be happy to amend my own motion to remove it, but then bring another motion asking staff to investigate how many applications over the course of 12 months have occurred. Again, I cannot stress strongly enough that people should be put on notice that when there is a change of use, that there are requirements under our zoning and other processes, and there could very well be the imposition of development charges if the approval for commercial uses goes ahead.
So if I may just make a note to that point, the municipal approval form does cite under the use of the structure must comply with uses and relevant provisions under the zoning bylaw, subject property sale.
I had a concern with the last paragraph of the motion too, but for a slightly different reason. As Bob Mitchell pointed out in his question to us, I don't think we have good definitions of private use or commercial use right now. And if we sent this letter out, okay, I can think of dozens of, we have a policy, I'm not sure it's written down, in Mono of encouraging but I can think of several dozen people that I know of who say have a garage, which is, you know, and they have a lift in there, and they're fixing cars. People get a horse barn, and then the next thing you know, they're running riding lessons. I can think of a person, you know, who does that, which I think is, some people would say is commercial. They're having classes of children. I can think of people who have put craft shops in front of their house in an accessory building. I can think of hundreds of situations where people are doing something that may or may not be construed as commercial, depending on how we define it. And until that happens, I mean, if we sent this letter out, I think it could give some misinformation, or at least cause a lot of confusion just now, until we settle this issue of what exactly is commercial.
Yeah, I'm going to make this very easy. I'm going to move a motion to delete that paragraph, subject to some stronger wording going into the municipal approval document as to the necessity of coming back for rezoning in the event of an overt switch to a commercial use. I think our language needs to be stronger in that document, frankly.
I think that's a very fair compromise.
On the point of order, if you're the mover of this motion, I don't think you need to move another motion to delete it. It's just consider it a friendly amendment if you want. Take it out.
I'm very friendly with myself. I'm happy to take it out.
Okay, so
Okay.
take this one and, yes, Ralph?
Through the mayor, John, your motion is designed to provide some control for situations like which we recently experienced. And one of the questions is the way it comes up is, what's the use of the building? And you included that at the front. You listed that in your first 5 bullets at the very first one. I would. That's all right. I wonder if I think it'd be a good idea if we included in the therefore be it resolved, that we include that it will address also the use of the building. That's one of the factors that we'd like to be considered.
Thank you for that. I accept that as a friendly amendment.
So will you add that, or do you want a formal amendment? Just add it.
Okay, so what's the?
Better defining the term accessory and specific uses.
And address uses. And I did say with the view to, among other things, so there is an opportunity to
Yes.
go beyond the examples that I gave.
I see that. But use is such a big thing, I think.
So the first bullet, better defining the term accessory and intended use.
Or appropriate uses.
Address appropriate uses.
That's a little more problem.
Intended is good.
I think it just, I think all it needs to say is better, because you're talking about defining, so better defining the term accessory and bracket uses, or quotes. No, because you want to put the definitions as to what the uses are.
Okay, so moved by Creelman. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Ralph. Any further discussion? All in favor? That carries. And on to Schedule A. Sharon, do you have anything on Schedule A? John? Ralph?
Yes, I do, Your Honor. I'd like to discuss item 8.8, which is the discussion paper from the Ministry of Health. You'll probably get tired of me talking about the public health, but it's a big issue that's going on right now. The discussion paper is really in response to concerns and feedback about the proposed merger of public health units. And to this end, I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, Mr. Fine, I think it's Jim Fine, has been appointed as a advisor to the ministry. His job is to assess the proposed mergers by consulting with municipalities and boards of health and come back to the ministry with a recommendation. This discussion paper kind of sets a template for discussion because it deals with some of the perceived challenges based on the last 3 audits or reports which have been done for public health since 2004, I guess. And the challenges are that some have are, I'm going to articulate them. One is the ability to do what they're supposed to do. In other words, do they have the capacity? And some of the smaller ones probably don't. And part of the problem has been a problem of recruiting and retention of public health workers. The second is there's some, second and third, sort of the same. There's some overlap between social services, hospitals and doctors and public health. And we'd like to get that sort of, to get rid of the duplication so that we know who's doing what. And third, there's some problems with what some of the departments of health are doing in terms of research. And there's a fair bit of duplication there, so that they'd like to see some sort of priorities articulated a bit more clearly. And we feel that the paper feels that this would be a good idea. So this is what it's all about, is a background for Mr. Fine's work. And I don't know, Your Honor and John, whether or not the Dufferin County is aware of this yet, or that they probably have to contact Mr. Fine to present what their concerns are. I know that their medical officer of health, Mercer, is well aware of this and expects to have an interview.
I can ask John this question privately, but not being afraid to ask dumb questions in the public domain, I'll just go ahead and ask you now. I sort of understand this issue. How is it related to the other issue which is going on now of these, remember the presentation we had from the hospital?
Ontario health teams.
Yeah, like, is this related to it?
In a way, because public health has been here, hospitals are here, doctors are here, and they're not necessarily related in the ways that are helpful to the overall propagation of good health. So it does, and this is under duplication and misalignment, which is disaster.
And just in answer to your question, the CAO of Dufferin is aware of Mr. Fine's appointment. I think she knows him personally, and I believe as well that she participated in the webinar.
I tried to participate in that webinar, and my low-speed internet didn't come through. I did get the last half of it. I don't think I missed very much. The second item in Schedule A is number 12, which is the Ramara resolution. This is a township of Ramara, and it relates to the conservation authorities. And this is rather troubling. Anyway, I would like to be able to absent themselves if they desire from the conservation authorities' involvement, and with the idea that they would do things on their own. We're getting a fair bit of, I'll talk a little bit more about Nottawasaga Valley Conservation at the last meeting, because it's a very, it's a big issue.
So if there's nothing further, we have a motion that we accept Schedule A to this agenda. Moved by Nix and seconded by Creelman. All in favor? Carries. Okay, we're on to reports of staff and council members. So, Mr. Trotman?
Thank you, Mayor Ryan. I'll be brief. There are a few pre-consultation meetings coming up that I'll be attending to with respect to applications likely to be submitted in the near future. They're not, I think they're on the provincial highways, as I gather my thoughts here. We will be continuing with the Dufferin County Steering Committee for the official plan update. Again, so there's more work to be done in the coming weeks that will feed into all the local official plan updates that we will ultimately have to conform with. So there's an order here that we're continuing with. That's about it for now.
Mr. Dunmore?
Just to bring council up to speed with respect to the water main extension along Highway 9, the final agreements went out to the occupants of those land, and we're starting to get sign-offs and information coming back. We expect to bring this to council on December the 10th.
Do we have all 8 landowners in agreement?
There was 8 out of 10 that were in agreement, and we're dealing through the financials, and we'll have a report for council with respect to steps moving forward.
So what happens if we don't get the last 2 landowners to agree?
You'll have a report coming forward from the solicitor with respect to those, and how the options for council to deal with that.
I have nothing new to report.
Okay. Mr. Simpson?
Last month, I provided council with a schedule for meetings next year in 2020. I'd like to suggest an amendment to that schedule that I issued. We had a meeting scheduled for February 25th, but with the Ontario Good Roads Association that same week, I'm suggesting we cancel that meeting, the February 25th meeting, and then take the following meeting, which was March 10th, and move it up a week to March 3rd to evenly space the meetings out to accommodate for the missing that February 25th. So that would mean February 11th, March 3rd, and then March 24th. And I'll send that out. If everyone's in agreement, if council's in agreement with that, I'll send a new copy of that out. And the only other issue is October of 2018, council passed a bylaw about the no trucks, and that had set fines in it, and those just came back a year later, just a couple weeks ago, and are now approved, so that portion of the bylaw with the fines is now in effect.
As council knows, we met last week with the detachment commander regarding the Hockley property, just to update council. We also met with them at the same time to review a draft memorandum of understanding for enforcement of municipal bylaws. So I've prepared a draft. It's circulating internally to make sure we've got all the bylaws that we're looking at. I think there was common ground between us and the detachment commander. So my plan is to once we've had reviewed that draft internally, is to forward it to the OPP for consideration, and then send it back to the Police Services Board, where the resolution initiated, and Nikki's indicated that she'd be willing to take that forward at that time to PSB. Secondly, today, this afternoon, I was at a meeting for the kickoff for the county service delivery review that's being undertaken. So it was a meeting today with the CAOs and the consultants, just to give us an idea of what the process is going to be moving forward, not so much the details of it, but what processes they're looking for to move forward, just to give you an idea. They are looking to do an all councils meeting sometime in January to review the components that are involved in the review, and there will be monthly updates being provided through the county CAO and the consultants that will be also forthcoming to the council, so they're all aware. So you're all aware of what's transpiring on a monthly basis. So that's what we were working on this afternoon. So that's all I've got.
Ralph, did you have anything?
Yes, I attended the NBCA board meeting last Friday. We had a presentation there from Conservation Ontario from Bonnie Fox. And the issue here is the government's recommendation through Minister Urick that we divide the conservation programs into mandatory ones, which are supposedly core programs, and non-mandatory, and that municipalities would have the option to opt out of the non-mandatory programs. So the issue at the moment is that nobody knows what a mandatory program is, and the ministry hasn't yet defined it, although we do know that they cover three main areas: source water protection, natural hazards, and the protection of conservation areas and watersheds. When I listened to Bonnie, it sounded to me like she said that you can capture most of what the Conservation Authority does within the mandatory programs, because they all support the mandatory programs, whether it's education of children or whether it's reforestation or we really don't know where this is going there. On top of that, we've got Ramara, Councillor Ramara, moving that, suggesting they'd like to be able to opt out. Well, there is an issue here, I think, and when I first came on council, I recognized that we had no say in how much we had to pay the conservation authorities. And I find that to be a little bit of a problem. I think that they have responsibility, and we are not involved in making those decisions except through people like myself. And maybe that's enough. But as you know, we'll be paying over $100,000 this year to NBCA. So this issue of mandatory programs is something that we're waiting for more delineation. That's all. Thank you.
Could I just correct something that Councillor Manklow just said? We do determine how much we pay conservation authorities because we vote on the budget on the basis of your weighted current value assessment. So if enough municipalities don't want a particular service from the NBCA, they vote against the budget. And in the past, it's come very close. One year, we almost took the education program off. It had some problems. So it can be done. Okay?
Well, I recognize that. It's have to be given to the board members, but you represent the town. You're telling me how to get involved. They want to persuade some other people.
Fred? Sorry.
I have a question on conservation authorities. I trust this is going to be more successful than the province's attempts to allow students at universities and colleges to opt out of supporting their student council newspaper and student associations. That went down in flames in the courts just this last week.
Deputy Mayor?
I have none.
Nothing? Okay. So, are there any notices of motion? None? Okay. So we are going to move in camera, so thank you very much for attending tonight. We have a number of different items that we need to deal with. So the motion that council move into a closed meeting pursuant to section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended at 8:31 p.m. for 3 personnel matters about identifiable individuals, including municipal or local board employees. So first one is review of electoral reform task force applications. 2 is fire call fee collection. And 3 is the TRCA member appointment. And so, okay, so we'll take 5 minutes. Necessary readings to a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Town of Mona in session 23-2019 held on the 26th of November 2019, that to be signed by the mayor and the clerk, sealed and grossed in bylaw book. Moved by Martin and seconded by Creelman. All in favor? And that we adjourn this meeting at 9:27 p.m. Moved by Nix and seconded by Mike Flo. All in favor?